Take a sip, Isabel. Richard's voice was steady, cold as steel. Her hands trembled over the teacup, tears cutting through her mascara. Why are you doing this? She whispered. He leaned forward, eyes blazing. Because, sweetheart, I'm not as blind as you think. Before we begin, please like, subscribe and tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? United States, Canada, Malaysia, UK, Australia, Jamaica. Richard Cole had lived long enough to learn that money doesn't just solve problems. Sometimes, it hides them. At 62, he was the kind of billionaire who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. His name was stamped across half the high-rise towers in Austin. His company, Cole Enterprises, had its roots in real estate, but over 4 decades he'd built it into a diversified empire: tech, construction, renewable energy. People said he was lucky. He knew better. Luck had nothing to do with working 18-hour days for 30 years straight. But lately, success had started to feel hollow. It began the morning he woke to an empty bed. His wife, Isabel, wasn't beside him. Her perfume, the one he'd bought her last Christmas from Paris, still lingered faintly in the sheets, mixed with the scent of expensive lotion and something else: distance. He padded through the glass-walled mansion overlooking Lake Travis. The sunrise bled gold over the water, but all he could think about was the silence. Isabel was usually humming by now, sipping her almond latte, flipping through morning news on her tablet. Instead, she appeared in the doorway 30 minutes later, hair perfectly straightened, gym bag over her shoulder. "Morning," she said lightly, not kissing him like she used to. "Morning," he replied, forcing a smile. "Heading to Pilates?" She nodded. "Early class. I'll be back before lunch." But she wasn't. She came home past 2, claiming traffic on the highway. Richard didn't question it, not yet. He had promised himself years ago that after losing his first wife to cancer, he would never live with paranoia. Life was too short to be suspicious. Still, something in Isabel's tone, that detached politeness that replaced affection, began gnawing at him. The twins, Noah and Grant, both 7, ran into his office that evening, laughing and chasing each other. They were his light. Isabel followed behind, scrolling on her phone. "Boys, not in Daddy's office," she murmured, barely looking up. Richard closed his laptop, pulled the twins into his arms, kissed their messy hair. "Let them play," he said softly. "Work can wait." Isabel smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night his mother called. Margaret Cole was 85 but sharp as a blade. The kind of woman who read people like open books. "How's my son doing in that big house?" she asked. Richard chuckled. "Tired but good. Isabel's busy with her charities and yoga and all that. The boys are growing too fast." Margaret's silence lasted just long enough to make him uneasy. She said finally. "And how are you and Isabel doing?" He frowned. "We're fine. Why?" "Because, Richard," she said slowly, "I've been a woman for 85 years. I know when love is fading. It's in the small things. The tone, the distance, the way a woman looks through you instead of at you." "Mom." "Just listen to me," she interrupted. "When people think your eyes are blind to their behavior, they start showing their true colors." He sighed. "You think Isabel doesn't love me anymore?" "I think you should stop assuming she does," she said quietly. Richard brushed it off at first. He told himself his mother was overreacting. Isabel was just restless. Younger, energetic, maybe bored with his predictable routines. He was 22 years older than her. That kind of gap came with its own insecurities. Still, as the days passed, he started noticing the tiny fractures he had ignored. The sudden weekend trips, to visit her cousin in Dallas. The long showers followed by the scent of a different cologne on her clothes. The secretive laughter when her phone buzzed late at night. One evening, Richard walked into the living room to find Isabel sitting by the fireplace, staring at her phone with that same distracted smile. "Who's got you smiling like that?" he teased lightly. She startled, quickly locking the screen. "Just a friend. Don't be jealous." "I'm not jealous," he said, trying to keep it playful. "Just curious." "Well, curiosity killed the cat," she replied flatly, standing up and walking past him. Something cold moved through his chest. The breaking point came a week later. Richard had returned from a board meeting early, hoping to surprise her. Her car was gone. So was the nanny's. The house was silent, except for the faint beeping of the answering machine on the kitchen counter. He pressed play. "Hi, Mrs. Cole," a man's voice said. "Just confirming your reservation for 2 tonight, private booth, Lakefront Bistro. Looking forward to seeing you again." Richard stood frozen. His pulse pounded in his ears. That was their restaurant. He stared at the message for a long time, then picked up his phone and replayed it. The voice sounded smooth, confident, too comfortable. When Isabel returned around 11, her cheeks were flushed, eyes shining. She smelled faintly of wine. "Rough day?" Richard asked quietly. She blinked, startled by his tone. "Pilates was killer. Then I stopped at Whole Foods." "Why?" He smiled, too calmly. "No reason." But as she walked upstairs, he noticed the faintest smear of lipstick on the collar of her silk blouse. A shade he'd never seen her wear. That night, sleep wouldn't come. He sat in the dim light of his study, staring out at the water, his mother's words circling in his mind like vultures. When people think your eyes are blind, they start showing their true colors. He wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. He needed to know the truth first. Not just for himself, but for the boys, for the family name he'd spent his life protecting. When his phone buzzed, it was his old friend and lawyer, Frank Dorsey. "You sound like hell," Frank said after hearing his voice. "Maybe I am," Richard replied. "Frank, I think my wife's lying to me." "Then don't confront her," Frank said firmly. "Test her." "Test her?" "Yeah," Frank continued. "Act weak, sick, blind even. You'll be amazed what people show you when they think you can't see them." Richard laughed bitterly. "Blind? That's extreme." "So is betrayal," Frank replied. And just like that, a dangerous idea took root. We spend our lives chasing love, but maybe love isn't what blinds us. Maybe it's trust. If you've ever given someone everything only to realize they were playing a different game, then you'll understand what comes next. Before we go further, ask yourself this. If you lost your sight tomorrow, would the person sleeping next to you still love you, or start planning your funeral? Think about that, and if you're brave enough to hear what Richard discovers next, don't just watch, subscribe. Because what comes next will make you question everything you believe about love. The idea wouldn't leave his mind. It followed Richard Cole through boardrooms, into his empty bed, even through the quiet hum of his Bentley as he drove along Lake Travis. Pretend to be blind. It sounded absurd. But every time Isabel smiled too perfectly or avoided his eyes, the idea began to feel less like madness and more like strategy. 3 nights after that phone call, the plan started taking shape. He met Frank Dorsey at a dimly lit cigar lounge outside downtown Austin. Frank was a wiry man in his 60s with weathered hands and the no-nonsense tone of someone who'd buried more secrets than most people could imagine. "You're serious about this?" Frank asked, lighting his cigar. "Dead serious," Richard replied. "If she's lying, I need proof. If I accuse her without it, I'll just look like a paranoid old man afraid of losing his trophy wife." Frank exhaled a cloud of smoke, studying him. "Then you better commit. No halfway. If you're gonna play blind, you've gotta live it. Doctors, bandages, everything." Richard nodded slowly. "Then let's make it real." The next afternoon, as the sun scorched the Texas asphalt, Richard staged a mild car accident. His security driver swerved deliberately off the side road into a small ditch near his estate, enough impact to total the car but not enough to hurt anyone. Within hours, local news reported, "Billionaire real estate mogul survives crash, suffers vision loss." The story spread like wildfire. In the hospital room, Isabel sat beside his bed, tears streaking her perfect makeup. "Oh my God, Richard, I can't believe this happened. Can you see me? Can you see anything?" Richard blinked slowly, keeping his face calm. "Nothing. Just darkness." Her hand tightened around his. It should have been comforting, but her touch felt rehearsed, too delicate, too careful, like an actress afraid to miss her cue. Doctors, all prepped by Frank, confirmed the story. Temporary optic nerve trauma, they told her. He might recover in a few months, or maybe not. Isabel gasped, covering her mouth. Oh my God! Richard thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not grief, not fear, relief. It was gone in an instant. 2 days later, he was back home, blind, and wrapped in dark glasses, moving slowly with a cane. Isabel insisted on hiring a live-in nurse to help him. The nurse, Carolyn, was one of Frank's contacts, discreet, loyal, and trained to record everything. For the first few days, Isabel played the perfect wife. She cooked, she read him the news, she guided him through the house like a devoted partner. But by the second week, the cracks began to show. One morning, he asked softly, Isabel, could you get me my reading glasses from the study? Her sigh filled the room before her footsteps did. You don't need reading glasses, Richard. You can't see. He froze. That tone, sharp, dismissive, was one he hadn't heard before. Later that evening, he sat quietly in his study chair as Isabel spoke on the phone nearby. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but not low enough to hide her words. No, he can't see a damn thing, she was saying. Yes, I told you he's completely blind. We just have to be patient. A few months, tops. Once it's done, we'll figure out the rest. Richard's pulse thundered in his ears. Once it's done? He wanted to rip off the glasses, to demand answers. But he forced himself still. He'd waited this long, he could wait longer. That night, while Isabel slept, Richard crept downstairs. He felt his way through the kitchen and opened the panel behind the pantry wall, the secret control room his tech team had built years ago for security monitoring. Inside were 12 small screens, each showing a different part of the mansion. Every corner was covered, the hallways, the kitchen, the garage, even the guest house. He sat down slowly, breathing heavily, and pressed record. By morning, he had 5 hours of footage. Isabel pacing the patio, phone pressed to her ear, laughing softly. Then, a man's voice came faintly through the audio. Soon, baby. Soon, the man said. Isabel smiled. I can't wait. The world tilted beneath him. He turned up the volume, heart hammering, but the audio distorted. The man's face never appeared. Days passed. Richard stayed patient. He practiced his role, pretending to misstep, knocking over glasses, stumbling downstairs. The more helpless he looked, the bolder Isabel became. She started dressing up again, wearing perfume that wasn't his favorite. She took Pilates trips that lasted 8 hours. Once, he smelled whiskey on her breath at noon. Carolyn, the nurse, began reporting strange deliveries, new clothes, expensive jewelry, hotel bookings under Isabel's maiden name. Frank's investigation confirmed it. Isabel had opened a new bank account in Houston with $120,000 in recent transfers. Richard's heartbreak hardened into resolve. One evening he sat with the twins, Noah and Grant, watching cartoons or pretending to. Their laughter filled the room like sunlight, and for a fleeting moment he almost convinced himself none of this was real. But then Isabel walked in. She kissed the boys on their heads, gave him a stiff smile, and whispered into her phone as she walked upstairs. Tomorrow night, she said. Guest house. Same time. The next night, after the house fell quiet, Richard slipped out of bed. He followed the sound of laughter down the hall, past the kitchen, to the glass corridor that led to the guest house. Through the security feed on his tablet, he saw her, Isabel, wrapped in the arms of a younger man. Muscular. Sharp jawline. Maybe early 30s. Zach, she whispered. He kissed her neck. How's your blind husband doing? Isabel laughed softly. Blind as a bat. Poor man doesn't even know he's living with ghosts. Richard shut the tablet. His breathing came in jagged bursts. For the first time in years, tears burned his eyes. She wasn't just unfaithful, she was cruel. He stumbled back into the main house, collapsing into his chair. The twins' drawings hung on the wall beside him. Mommy, Daddy, and us. Crayon smiles, stick figures, innocence. He pressed a trembling hand to his face, whispering to no one. How do you tell your children their mother's heart belongs to a stranger? By dawn, he was sitting in the security room again. The monitors flickered with movement. Isabel and Zach were still in the guest house, asleep. He zoomed in on the bedside table and saw it. A baby photo. One of the twins. Zach picked it up, kissed it gently, and whispered, "My boy." Richard's heart went still. The world around him blurred. His ears rang. His breath came out in a single choked sob. He'd built empires, faced hostile takeovers, even buried a wife, but nothing prepared him for the quiet destruction of that moment. He stared at the screens until sunrise, his reflection in the glass pale and ghost-like. "All right," he said softly. "If this is how she wants to play it, then I'll give her the performance of a lifetime. They say blindness sharpens your other senses." Maybe that's true. Because Richard didn't just see her betrayal, he began to feel every lie, every whisper, every shift in the air. What he uncovered next would make even the devil hold his breath. The morning after watching his wife in another man's arms, Richard Cole didn't feel anger. He felt clarity. It was the kind of silence that came after a hurricane, the sound of devastation settling into focus. The lies, the late nights, the yoga retreats, the strange perfume, all the puzzle pieces now clicked into place with cruel precision. By sunrise, Richard had made a decision. He wasn't going to confront Isabel, not yet. He would watch her bury herself in her own deception. That same afternoon, Isabel came into his study carrying a tray with his lunch. "Here you go, honey," she said sweetly. "Grilled chicken and kale salad, just how you like it." Richard smiled faintly, pretending to fumble for the fork. "You're too good to me." She laughed softly. "Don't I know it?" The words rolled off her tongue too easily. He could almost taste the smugness behind them. When she left the room, he set the fork down and pressed a hidden button beneath the desk, activating a tiny voice recorder embedded inside his watch. Days turned into weeks, and the house on Lake Travis began to feel like a theater. Richard played his part perfectly, the fragile, blind husband who needed help walking, reading, dressing. And Isabel? She played the doting wife, when anyone was watching. When they were alone, her mask slipped. "Richard, can't you try to move faster?" she snapped one morning as he reached for his cane. "I'm doing my best," he said quietly. "Well, your best used to be better," she muttered under her breath. Sometimes she wouldn't even bother to talk to him. She'd pour herself wine at noon, lounge by the pool in silk robes, scrolling through her phone and giggling. Every laugh cut him open a little more. But Richard didn't stop watching. Every night, after the house fell silent, he slipped down to the security room and reviewed the day's recordings. He watched Isabel whispering on the phone. He watched her sneaking into the guest house. He watched Zach walking around half-dressed, pouring himself whiskey from Richard's collection, as if he owned the place. Then came the moment that shattered what little remained of Richard's heart. It was a Thursday night. The twins, Noah and Grant, had just fallen asleep upstairs. Isabel was supposed to be out shopping. On the monitor, Richard saw Zach sitting in the guest house with a baby photo in his hand, one of the twins' kindergarten portraits. He traced a finger over the image and said, "He's got your eyes." Isabel laughed softly. "And your stubbornness. Let's just hope Richard never figures it out." Zach grinned. "He won't. He's blind, remember?" They both laughed, the kind of laughter that only cruelty could produce. Richard felt like his lungs were collapsing. He rewound the footage again, until the words etched themselves into his mind. "He's got your eyes." The next morning, he contacted his private physician under the pretense of a routine checkup. Quietly, he requested DNA swabs from both boys. The results came a week later, delivered in a sealed envelope. Only one of the twins, Grant, was biologically his. The other, Noah, belonged to Zach. That night, Richard sat alone in his study, staring at the lake. The surface was still, reflecting the moon like a polished blade. He thought of his first wife, Mary, the woman who had believed in him when all he had was a pickup truck and a dream. She died 20 years ago, leaving him with a promise: don't let money change who you are. He had kept that promise. But Isabel had turned that purity into a weapon. Footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Isabel appeared at the doorway, wearing a silk robe and holding 2 glasses of wine. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. "No," Richard replied. "Too much on my mind." She walked over and handed him a glass. Drink. It'll help. He took it but didn't sip. Where were you earlier? Yoga, she said easily. At 10 p.m.? He smiled. Quick, pract. It was a late session. We're experimenting with moonlight meditation. He nodded slowly, pretending to accept it. Sounds peaceful. She touched his shoulder lightly, her fingers cool. You need peace, Richard. You've been through enough. Then she turned and left the room, humming softly. He set the untouched wine on the desk and whispered to himself, You're right, Isabel. I've been through enough. By the next morning, he'd hired 2 additional private investigators, one to follow Isabel's movements and another to track Zach's financials. Within 48 hours, they discovered that Isabel had opened multiple accounts under her maiden name and had quietly transferred over $5 million. $5 million, siphoned from his foundation, disguised as consulting expenses. Richard's grief hardened into something far colder, precision. That evening, he called Frank. I have everything, he said flatly. The affair, the child, the money. But there's something else going on. She's planning something. Frank hesitated. What makes you say that? I heard her, Richard said. She told him, once it's done, we'll be free. Frank's tone shifted. Richard, if you think she's dangerous, you need to move fast. Don't wait. But Richard didn't want the police, not yet. He wanted her to believe she'd won. The next day, Isabel threw a small dinner at the house. Friends, neighbors, the twins' teacher, laughter, champagne, perfectly normal. To anyone else, she was radiant, the beautiful, caring wife of a successful man facing adversity. She fed him carefully, touched his arm with gentle affection, even wiped a bit of sauce from his chin. Oh, honey, she said playfully, you're a mess without me. He smiled faintly. I know. The guests cooed about how strong their love was. Isabel beamed like a saint. But later that night, when everyone was gone, she poured him his evening tea, and for the first time, Richard noticed how long she lingered over the cup. Her back was turned, her movements too slow, too deliberate. She came back, smiling, holding the tray. Here you go, sweetheart. He took the cup, felt the heat radiate against his palm, and set it aside. Later, he said softly. You sure? Yeah, he said. I'm too tired tonight. Her shoulders relaxed with what looked almost like disappointment. That same night, as she slept beside him, Richard replayed the kitchen camera feed. There, just before she brought him the tea, she'd pulled a small dark vial from her purse, uncapped it, poured 2 drops into the cup. He zoomed in. The label was faint, but visible. Digitalis. A heart-stopping poison if ingested in the right dose. His stomach turned. His wife had just tried to kill him. He didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, listening to her breathe. Every rise and fall of her chest was a cruel reminder that the woman he loved, the one he'd trusted with his legacy, was planning his death. By sunrise, he had made his choice. No more hiding. No more pretending. He would give her one last performance, a scene she'd never forget. There's a moment when heartbreak turns into purpose, when a man stops asking and starts planning how. Richard had reached that moment. He had played the fool long enough. Now, it was time for Isabel to see just how dangerous a blind man can be. You think you've seen betrayal? You haven't. In next act, what happens next will flip everything you thought you knew about revenge. Subscribe now, because you won't believe what she does when she realizes he can see. Morning light bled through the blinds, painting gold stripes across the bedroom wall. Isabel was still asleep beside him, her arm lazily draped across the bed, her face calm, the same face that had smiled while pouring poison into his tea hours before. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, his fingers tapping against his cane. Every instinct in him screamed to get up, to leave, to let the law deal with her. But he couldn't, not yet. He wanted her to know what she'd done. He wanted her to feel the fear she had tried to feed him. He turned his wedding ring slowly, the metal cold against his skin. You made me blind, he whispered under his breath, but you forgot one thing. I was watching the whole time. By mid-morning, the house was quiet. The twins were at school, and the staff had the day off. Just Richard and Isabel, alone. He sat in the living room in his usual chair, the dark glasses hiding the eyes that could now see perfectly. The poison tea sat untouched on the table beside him. He heard her footsteps before she appeared, heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. "Good morning," she said, stretching her arms as if nothing was wrong. "You want breakfast?" "No, thank you," he replied, voice even. "Just tea." Her lips curled into a small smile. "Of course." As she turned toward the kitchen, Richard pressed the small button hidden inside his cane. The command sent a signal to the security system, unlocking the digital storage vault in his study. Inside were the recordings, every betrayal, every whisper, every drop of poison she'd poured. He could hear her in the kitchen now, the clinking of porcelain, the quiet pop of a bottle cap. The same routine, the same lie. When she returned, she was smiling again, holding a tray with 2 cups. "I made one for myself this time," she said, setting it down. Richard nodded, his expression unreadable. "How thoughtful." He reached out, fingers trembling, took the cup, and brought it close to his lips. "Wait," he said suddenly, pausing mid-sip. Isabel's body stiffened. "What?" "Take a sip first." The words cut through the silence like a blade. Her hand froze halfway to her mouth. "Why would I do that?" she said, her voice tight. "Because you made it," he said softly. "And I trust you, don't I?" Her eyes darted to his face. For the first time in weeks, she saw something different behind those glasses. Stillness. Power. Awareness. "Richard," she said, trying to laugh. "You're being silly. You know I wouldn't." "Drink it, Isabel." The tone of his voice changed. It wasn't a plea. It was an order. The kind that used to make boardrooms fall silent. Her throat bobbed. "Richard, why are you saying this? You think I'd hurt you?" He set the cup down on the table, slow and deliberate. "I don't think, Isabel. I know." He reached up and removed his glasses. Her scream was small, sharp, and strangled. He looked at her with eyes that burned, not with anger, but with the raw, unfiltered weight of truth. "Surprised?" he said quietly. "You didn't think I'd see your little show in the kitchen last night?" "Richard, please. Don't," he snapped, standing. "I've watched you lie to me. I've watched you hold another man in my house. I've watched you pour poison into my drink. And I've watched you laugh about it." Tears streaked her face. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think," he said, his voice steady now. "You played your part beautifully, Isabel. The grieving wife, the loving caretaker. But every performance ends. And this is your curtain call." He turned toward the doorway and called out, "Frank." A door opened down the hall. Footsteps. Then Frank Dorsey appeared, flanked by 2 private security men in black suits. Isabel's eyes widened. You set me up?" Richard gave a humorless laugh. "No, Isabel. You set yourself up. I just hit record." He nodded toward Frank, who placed a small tablet on the coffee table. A video began to play. On screen, Isabel was in the kitchen, pulling the dark vial from her purse, tipping it into his cup. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, Richard, please." "Save it," he said coldly. "I've heard every excuse in the book. You wanted my money. You wanted my death to look natural. But you forgot, every inch of this house sees more than you think." Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. "I was scared. Zach said you'd cut me off. He said you were planning to leave me." Richard stared at her, silent. "He said we could be together," she whispered. "He said he'd take care of me. And he took care of you, all right," Richard said bitterly. "Right into a prison cell." Her head snapped up. "What?" He motioned to Frank. Frank's voice was calm, almost detached. "We've already handed the evidence to law enforcement. Zach was arrested this morning at Austin Bergstrom Airport. Tried to board a flight to Mexico under a fake name." Isabel gasped, shaking her head. No, he said, he promised." Richard turned away, unable to look at her any longer. "He promised you everything because he wanted what I built. And you gave it to him, your loyalty, your body, even my son." She froze, eyes wide. You know, I know one of the twins isn't mine. Her sobs deepened. Richard, please, I didn't mean to. Stop, he said softly. I don't want your apologies. I want my life back. He gestured to the guards. Take her upstairs. The police will be here in 10 minutes. They stepped forward, gently lifting her to her feet. Isabel didn't resist. Her eyes, red and swollen, searched his face one last time. Do you still love me? She whispered. Richard didn't answer. He just looked at her for a long moment and said, I loved who I thought you were. She broke then. The sound that came out of her wasn't human. It was the sound of a soul collapsing in on itself. When she was gone, the house felt emptier than ever. Frank placed a folder on the table, the divorce papers already prepared. You sure you want to go through with this? Richard nodded. Every cent she touched goes back into the family trust. Leave her nothing. Frank hesitated. And the boys? They stay with me, Richard said quietly. Both of them. I raised them. That's all that matters. Frank nodded, but his eyes softened. You did what you had to do, Rich. You saved your life. Richard looked out toward the lake, the sun dipping low over the water. I didn't save my life, Frank. I just stopped someone else from taking it. Hours later, after the police had taken Isabel away and the last car left the driveway, Richard stood alone in the living room. The silence was so heavy it pressed against his chest. He walked over to the untouched cup of tea and stared at it for a long time before pouring it down the sink. Then he whispered, I forgive you, Isabel. But I'll never forget. Love doesn't die in one moment. It dies piece by piece, every time trust is betrayed, every time loyalty is sold. Richard didn't just lose a wife that day. He lost the illusion that love alone could save anyone. The mansion on Lake Travis had never been quieter. The echoes of laughter that once filled its halls were gone, replaced by the hum of the air conditioning and the steady ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. For the first time in months, the place felt like what it truly was, a house, not a home. 2 weeks had passed since Isabel's arrest. Her face had been splashed across every news outlet, Billionaire's wife charged in attempted poisoning. Some called her a monster. Others called her desperate. Richard didn't care what they called her. He had stopped reading after the first headline. He spent most of his mornings sitting on the back patio, overlooking the lake with a cup of black coffee and silence. Sometimes, the twins, Noah and Grant, would come running out, chasing each other with sticks, their laughter cutting through the stillness like sunlight through clouds. They didn't understand what had happened. They just knew Mommy went away. When they asked when she was coming back, Richard always said the same thing, not for a long time. One morning his mother, Margaret, arrived unannounced. Her small frame looked fragile against the towering doors of the mansion, but her voice was as strong as ever. Well, she said, lowering herself into a chair beside him, you finally listened to your mother. Richard managed a weak smile. You warned me. I warned you because I've seen what loneliness can make a man do, she said. You thought you were buying love, but son, love isn't for sale, not even for a billionaire. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. Everything she said was true. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. What are you going to do now? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe rebuild. Maybe retire. He looked out over the water. Maybe just breathe. Margaret nodded. Breathe first. Then build again. That's what coal men do. Later that day, Richard met with Frank at his downtown office. The divorce papers had gone through. Isabel's assets were frozen. Zach, her lover, had been denied bail and was awaiting trial. But despite winning, Richard didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow. Frank handed him an envelope. You need to see this, he said. Richard frowned, opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter on soft white stationery. He recognized the looping cursive instantly. Dear Richard, it began. If you're reading this, it means I have nothing left to lose. I know you hate me, you should. But before you erase me completely, you deserve to know one thing. Not everything I told you was a lie. He kept reading. You were kind to me when no one else was. You made me feel seen. Yes, I made choices I can't defend. But I didn't plan to hurt you, not at first. I just wanted to survive. Zach changed me, scared me. I was in too deep to walk away. When you went blind, he told me if I didn't help him, he'd ruin me, ruin us. I don't expect forgiveness. But please, don't take it out on the boys. They're innocent. And one more thing, you never tested the right child. Richard's hands went cold. His eyes skimmed the last line again. You never tested the right child. What the hell does that mean? He murmured. Frank leaned back in his chair. She sent that from county jail 2 days ago. You want me to run another test? Richard nodded slowly. Do it. Quietly. A week later, Frank called. His voice was hesitant. You might want to sit down for this. I'm already sitting, Richard said flatly. The second test came back. Both twins are not yours. The words hung in the air like a noose. Richard's breath left his lungs in a long, hollow exhale. Not mine. Frank's voice softened. No. I double-checked the lab. There's no mistake. For a long moment, Richard said nothing. He just stared at the lake through the office window, watching sunlight glitter across the water. Thank you, he said finally, his voice steady. Don't tell anyone else. Not yet. He ended the call and sat there, the world tilting beneath him. He thought about Noah and Grant, their giggles, their drawings, their small hands wrapped around his. He had raised them from birth. He had taught them to swim, to ride bikes, to dream. They were his whole life. And now he knew by blood they weren't his sons at all. But as the truth settled in, something unexpected happened. Instead of rage, he felt peace. Because the truth didn't change what mattered. They were his children in every way that counted. That evening, he sat on the couch as the boys played with toy cars on the rug. Dad! Noah shouted. Watch this. Richard smiled. I'm watching, buddy. The toy car flipped in midair and landed perfectly on its wheels. The boys cheered. For the first time in months, Richard laughed. A full, honest laugh that echoed through the empty mansion. He realized something in that moment. Isabel had taken his trust, but she hadn't taken his heart. His love for those boys was real, and no DNA test could destroy that. Months passed. The trial came and went. Isabel pled guilty. Zach turned on her, claiming she masterminded the poisoning, though everyone knew they were equally guilty. Richard didn't attend the sentencing. He didn't need to watch her in chains to know justice had been served. Instead, he devoted himself to something new, a foundation called Eyes Open, dedicated to helping victims of manipulation and domestic betrayal rebuild their lives. He started hosting seminars, telling his story not as a billionaire, but as a man who lost everything and still chose compassion over bitterness. People listened. Some cried. Others confessed their own secrets. The mansion, once filled with deceit, became a place of healing. One late autumn evening after putting the twins to bed, Richard sat on the patio with his mother again. The lake shimmered under the moonlight. You ever think about forgiving her? Margaret asked gently. Richard exhaled, staring at the ripples on the water. Every day. Do you think you ever will? He smiled faintly. Maybe. But not for her, for me. Margaret nodded approvingly. That's my boy. They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the crickets. Then Richard spoke again. She was right about one thing, though. What's that? I wasn't blind because of an accident. I was blind because I wanted to believe in something that never existed. Margaret placed her hand over his. Then keep your eyes open now, son. There's still life left to see. He looked at the stars. For the first time in years, he believed her. They say the truth sets you free, but freedom isn't painless. Sometimes, it means letting go of what you loved most and choosing peace over anger. Richard lost his marriage, his illusion, even his legacy by blood. But what he found was worth more: clarity, forgiveness, and a love that no lie could erase. Before you scroll away, ask yourself this. If the person you trusted most betrayed you, would you seek revenge or redemption? Richard chose peace. Could you? Don't just watch stories like this, learn from them. Subscribe, share, and stay tuned for part 2, because sometimes the end of love is just the beginning of truth.